The silk of Amara's red evening dress felt like a second skin, a rare moment of elegance that made her feel almost human again. She was just reaching for her water, her eyes locked on the sharp, calm gaze of Seo Junho, when the heavy oak doors of the restaurant didn't just open, they slammed. Amara didn't need to look. The air in the room didn't just chill, it curdled. Every polished conversation died mid-sentence. The man sitting across from her, the one her aunt had promised, was different. The one with the quiet power and a luxury watch that cost more than her apartment didn't flinch. Junho simply set his crystal glass down with a soft, final clink. Amara. The roar was jagged, a sound of pure, unwashed rage that she had spent 6 months trying to scrub from her nightmares. It was Travis Cole, the man she had vanished from, the man whose love always left a mark. He was charging through the tables like a wrecking ball, a dark denim blur shoving aside a waiter as if he were made of straw. Amara froze, her lungs feeling as though they had been filled with concrete. She watched, paralyzed, as a drop of condensation rolled down her glass, mimicking the cold sweat breaking out on her neck. "You think you're a queen now?" Travis's voice tore through the silence of the 5-star dining room, dripping with familiar, toxic entitlement. "You think you can just hide behind a suit?" She wanted to run, to scream, but her body did what it always did when Travis appeared. It turned to stone, waiting for the impact. Junho still hadn't moved. He sat there in his pristine white shirt, his eyes tracking Travis with the clinical detachment of a predator watching a frantic, dying animal. Amara wanted him to call for help. She wanted him to be scared. Then Travis reached the table. He didn't grab her arm. Instead, he reached past the table and buried his thick, calloused fingers into the roots of her natural curls. With a violent, guttural grunt, he yanked her head back. Pain exploded at the base of Amara's skull. Her vision swam with the ceiling lights as her chair groaned, tilting on 2 legs. She was a puppet again, her neck exposed and her dignity stripped away in front of 50 strangers. "I told you," Travis hissed, his breath hot and smelling of desperation against her ear. "If I can't have you, nobody gets to keep you." Through the haze of tears and the throbbing in her scalp, Amara saw Junho finally stand. He didn't rush, and he didn't shout. The room held its breath as he looked Travis dead in the eye. Slowly, with a grace that was more terrifying than any scream, Junho began to unbutton his left cuff, then his right. As the fabric slid up his forearms, the black ink of a snarling tiger began to emerge, uncoiling against his skin. "Remove your hand," Junho said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Before I decide to take the whole arm." "Hello, family. Before we proceed, I would love to know where you are watching from. Drop it in the comment and also subscribe to this channel if you are new here." Now let's dive into the story. The searing pain in Amara's scalp was a brutal anchor, dragging her back to the reality she had spent 6 agonizing months trying to outrun. As Travis's fingers remained coiled in her natural curls, his grip felt less like a physical assault and more like the tightening of the invisible leash he had never truly let go of. For half a year, Amara had lived in the shivering silence of a woman who was technically free, but spiritually imprisoned. She had changed her phone number 3 times, deleted every social media account she owned, and moved into a studio apartment with 3 deadbolts. Yet Travis had always been there, a digital ghost haunting the periphery of her life. He had started small, with no caller ID, pings at 3 in the morning that left her staring at the ceiling, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Then came the emails, hundreds of them, alternating between weeping apologies and venomous threats, landing in her inbox faster than she could mark them as spam. He had hacked her food delivery apps just to let her know he knew what she was eating. He had sent friend requests to her new coworkers from burner accounts, slowly poisoning her professional reputation before she could even build it. It was a psychological siege designed to make her believe that the world was small, and that no matter where she went, the horizon always ended with him. Tonight was supposed to be the first time she stepped out of that shadow. When her aunt had arranged this date with Seo Junho, Amara had felt a flicker of something she thought had died. Hope. She had spent 2 hours in front of her mirror, meticulously styling her curls and applying her makeup, trying to cover the faint, lingering hollows under her eyes that months of looking over her shoulder had carved there. Putting on the red evening dress had felt like donning armor. She wanted to be the woman she was before Travis, vibrant, ambitious, and unafraid to be seen. Meeting Junho had, for a few blissful minutes, felt like the answer to a prayer she was too scared to voice. He didn't look at her with the pitying, survivor gaze she received from therapists or well-meaning friends. He looked at her with a sharp, unwavering focus that made her feel substantial again. His presence was a mountain of calm, a stark contrast to the erratic, flickering energy of the man currently trying to tear her hair from her head. As they had talked about the city and her dreams of starting a consulting firm, the digital leash had felt like it was finally fraying. She had allowed herself to imagine a future where her phone was just a phone and a knock at the door was just a neighbor. But Travis's laugh, a jagged and broken sound, shattered that fragile illusion. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you, Amara?" he hissed, his voice vibrating through the bone of her skull. "I see everything. I know where you sleep. I know who you talk to. You're mine. You've always been mine." The weight of his hand was a reminder that her freedom had been a lie. Every step she had taken toward independence had been watched, catalogued, and waited upon. He had allowed her this night, just so he could snatch it away at the moment of her greatest joy, proving that his reach was longer than any law or any distance she could put between them. Amara's hands were white-knuckled on the edge of the linen tablecloth, her eyes blurred with tears of both physical pain and the crushing weight of realization. She was tired. She was so incredibly tired of being the prey. She looked at Junho through the haze, expecting to see the same disgust or fear that usually sent her dates running for the exit once Travis made his inevitable appearance. Instead, she saw a man who was utterly unbothered by the chaos. Junho's gaze remained locked on Travis, his expression as cold and immovable as deep-sea ice. There was no panic in his eyes, only a dark, simmering calculation. As he continued to roll up his sleeves, the intricate ink of the tiger on his forearm seemed to pulse in the low light of the restaurant. The luxury watch on his wrist caught the glow of the flickering candles, a steady ticking reminder that Travis's time was running out. Amara realized then that the invisible leash hadn't just been pulled. It had finally been handed to someone who knew exactly how to snap it. The silence in the restaurant was deafening, a vacuum created by the collision of Travis's loud, messy violence and Junho's silent, orderly power. Amara felt the shift in the air, a drop in pressure that signaled a coming storm. Travis was still yelling, still trying to assert a dominance that was rapidly evaporating in the face of the man standing across from him. Amara stopped fighting the pull of her hair and leaned into the pain, her eyes never leaving Junho. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't just waiting for the blow, she was waiting for the rescue. The transition from silence to violence happened so slowly, it felt like the air itself was thickening into glass. Seo Junho stood with a lethal, rhythmic deliberation, his eyes never straying from Travis's frantic, sweating face. The restaurant was a vacuum of held breath, the clatter of silverware and the hum of distant traffic replaced by the heavy, audible thud of Amara's heart against her ribs. Travis, fueled by a delusion of dominance, didn't notice the shift in the room's gravity. He was still snarling, his hand buried deep in Amara's curls, yanking her head back until her neck felt like it was on the verge of snapping. He felt powerful because he was making a scene, but Junho was about to show him the difference between a loud man and a dangerous one. Junho's fingers moved to his left cuff, unfastening the silk-covered button with a terrifyingly steady hand. As he began to roll the fabric up his forearm, the first ink emerged, the dark, jagged stripes of a Siberian tiger. It wasn't just art, it was a mark of rank, a map of a life lived in the shadows where mercy was a foreign currency. He repeated the motion on his right arm, revealing the rest of the beast, a predator uncoiling across his skin to match the one rising in his eyes. The tattoos were a warning, a final invitation for Travis to save himself, but the man was too blinded by his own toxic ego to read the room. "I don't think you heard me," Junho said, his voice dropping to a low, melodic register that was more frightening than any shout. "I said, remove your hand." Travis laughed, a high-pitched, desperate sound that cracked in the middle. "You think some ink makes you tough? You're just a suit with a fancy watch. She's mine. I made her and I can break her." To punctuate his claim, Travis gave Amara's hair another brutal wrench, forcing a sharp cry of agony from her lips. That cry was the catalyst. In a movement so fast it blurred the vision of the onlookers, Junho crossed the short distance between them. He didn't throw a wild, barroom punch. He moved with the surgical precision of an executioner. His left hand shot out like a viper, his thumb pressing into a specific nerve cluster on Travis's wrist. The effect was instantaneous. Travis's hand didn't just let go. It went limp, his fingers splaying open as if the muscles had been turned to water. Amara tumbled forward, her head dropping as the tension vanished, her hands catching her on the edge of the table. Before Travis could even process the loss of his grip, Junho's right hand closed around the back of the man's neck. With a terrifying display of raw strength, he slammed Travis's face into the tabletop. The sound was a sickening thud that echoed off the high ceilings, followed by the crystalline shatter of a wine glass that had been in the way. Travis tried to lunge back, his face a mask of shock and blood, but Junho was already there, pivoting with the grace of a dancer. He drove a knee into Travis's solar plexus, a strike delivered with enough force to fold the larger man in half. As Travis wheezed, his lungs desperately trying to remember how to take in air, Junho grabbed him by the front of his denim jacket and hauled him upright, only to spin him toward the exit. The violence was clinical. There was no rage on Junho's face, only a cold, focused intent. He delivered a final, sweeping kick to the back of Travis's legs, sending the intruder sprawling across the marble floor toward the hostess station. Two men in dark, charcoal-gray suits appeared from the shadows of the coat check, men Amara hadn't noticed before, men who moved with the same predatory stillness as Junho. They didn't ask questions. They simply reached down, grabbed Travis by the underarms, and dragged him toward the street like a bag of refuse. "Make sure he understands," Junho directed in Korean, his voice flat and final. "If he looks toward this street again, he loses the eyes." He didn't wait to see them vanish. He turned back to the table, the violence vanishing from his posture as if it had never been there. The restaurant remained in a state of stunned, absolute silence. No one breathed, no one moved. The manager, who had been frozen behind the bar, looked as though he wanted to apologize but found himself unable to form words. Junho reached for a clean linen napkin and stepped toward Amara. His hands, still bare and inked, were remarkably steady as he reached out. For a second, Amara flinched, the instinct of a hunted woman overriding her relief. But Junho stopped, his hand hovering inches from her face, waiting for her permission. "He is gone, Amara," he said softly, the edge in his voice replaced by a protective warmth. "He will never put his hands on you again. You have my word." As he gently used the napkin to dab a stray drop of wine from her cheek, Amara looked at the tattoos on his arms. The tiger, the scales, the symbols of a world that thrived on blood and loyalty. She realized that while she had spent months running from a monster, she had just been rescued by something far more formidable. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was being eclipsed by a new, intoxicating sense of security. She was no longer just a survivor. She was someone under the protection of the Seo family, and for the first time, she felt like the world was finally afraid of her, instead of the other way around. The adrenaline that had sustained Amara through the restaurant confrontation began to ebb, replaced by a hollow, ringing silence as Junho's black sedan glided through the rain-slicked streets of the city. She sat deep in the leather seat, her scalp still throbbing where Travis had violated her space, but the physical pain was secondary to the surreal atmosphere of the car's interior. Junho sat beside her, his sleeves now rolled back down and buttoned, once again the picture of a polished executive, yet the image of the snarling tiger etched into his skin remained burned into her mind. He didn't speak, but his presence was a heavy, comforting weight, a silent promise that the chaos of the last hour was over. As the car pulled up to her apartment building, the one she had chosen for its locks and its anonymity, Junho reached into the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. He withdrew a sleek, matte black smartphone, unbranded and devoid of any markings, and held it out to her. It was heavy in her hand, cool and substantial. He explained that this was an emergency line, an untraceable connection that bypassed standard networks, pre-programmed with a single number that would reach him or his personal security detail at any hour of the day or night. It was a gift of shadows. a tool for a life she was only beginning to understand. Amara looked at the device, then at the man beside her. She had spent months jumping at every phantom vibration of her old phone, terrified of what Travis might have sent or what digital trap he had laid. This new phone felt like a shield, but it also felt like a key to a door she wasn't sure she was ready to open. Junho told her that her old life was a vulnerability he could no longer permit. She was to leave her previous phone in the car, and with it, the digital leash Travis had used to strangle her peace of mind. When she stepped out of the car, she realized the protection didn't end with the phone. A second black vehicle was idling at the curb, and as she approached the entrance to her building, a man in a dark suit stepped out. He didn't speak, but he bowed slightly, a gesture of profound, silent respect that felt completely foreign to her. Junho informed her that this was Min-jun, and he, along with a rotating team of silent Korean drivers, would be stationed outside her door and her workplace indefinitely. They weren't just drivers. They were sentinels, trained to anticipate threats before they even materialized. The realization hit her then, sharper than the cold night air. Seo Junho wasn't just a businessman with a penchant for high-end watches and arranged dates. No legitimate real estate mogul had a private, untraceable communication network or a small army of disciplined, shadow-dwelling soldiers at his beck and call. He operated in a world that existed parallel to the one she knew, a world governed by blood, ink, and absolute loyalty. She saw it in the way the men looked at him, not with the casual rapport of employees, but with the fervent devotion of those who would walk into fire on his command. Upstairs, the silence of her apartment felt different. Usually, the quiet was a canvas for her anxiety, a space where she imagined Travis's footsteps in the hallway or his face at the window. Tonight, the silence was anchored by the knowledge of the man sitting in the black car downstairs and the weight of the matte black phone on her nightstand. She walked to the window and looked down. The sedan was still there, a dark, immovable shape beneath the flickering streetlights. It was a terrifying thought, being so closely monitored, yet for the first time in 6 months, she didn't feel like a victim being watched by a predator. She felt like a person being guarded by a king. She sat on her bed and turned the unbranded phone over in her hands. There were no apps, no social media, no way for the outside world to find her unless she wanted to be found. It was a clean slate, but one bought with the currency of Junho's dangerous influence. She thought about the surgical violence she had witnessed at the restaurant, the way he had dismantled Travis without breaking a sweat. He had promised she would never be touched again, and looking at the silent, powerful men he had placed around her life, she believed him. But she also knew that such protection came with a price. To accept the Seo family's shield was to accept their shadows. And as she drifted into a heavy, dreamless sleep, Amara realized she was no longer just running away from her past. She was walking toward a future where the rules were written in ink and enforced by the man who held her heart. The rain against the window pane was a rhythmic, scratching sound that usually kept Amara awake, but tonight, the apartment felt different, held in a pressurized silence that seemed to hum with a hidden frequency. 3 floors below, the black sedan remained a silent sentinel, but inside the darkened living room, the atmosphere was thick with a cold, predatory patience. Amara was in the bedroom, the matte black emergency phone gripped in her hand, while the main living space remained draped in shadows, save for the faint, intermittent glow of a street lamp filtering through the blinds. Travis Cole didn't believe in boundaries. He believed only in the gravity of his own obsession. He had spent the last 2 hours bypassing the improved security of the building, fueled by a cocktail of bruised ego and the desperate need to reassert his thumbprint on Amara's soul. He moved with a practiced, thuggish stealth, scaling the fire escape with the agility of a man who had spent his life breaking things that didn't belong to him. When he finally jimmied the window of the small kitchenette, he felt a surge of familiar, toxic triumph. He expected to find Amara trembling in her bed, or perhaps packing a bag to run again. He expected to hear her gasp his name in that specific tone of terror that fed his sense of self-worth. Instead, as he stepped over the sill and into the darkness, he found a silence so absolute it felt like a physical weight. Travis adjusted his grip on the heavy tactical flashlight he carried, his eyes straining to adjust to the gloom. He moved toward the center of the room, his boots silent on the carpet, his mind already rehearsing the threats he would use to bring her back to heel. "You're late, Travis." The voice didn't come from the bedroom. It came from the high-backed wing chair in the corner of the room, a shadow within a shadow. Travis spun around, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark, only to stop abruptly as it hit the polished toe of a handmade Italian leather shoe. He tracked the light upward, past the sharp crease of black dress pants, until it illuminated Seo Junho. The Mafia boss was sitting perfectly still, his legs crossed, a glass of amber liquid resting on his knee. He wasn't wearing his jacket, his white shirt was open at the collar, the black ink of the tiger on his neck visible even in the harsh glare of the flashlight. He didn't blink. He didn't shield his eyes. He simply looked through the light, his gaze so cold it seemed to absorb the heat from the room. "Who the hell are you?" Travis spat, though the bravado in his voice wavered, a hairline fracture appearing in his confidence. "This is between me and my girl. Get out before I make you." Junho didn't move. "She was never yours, Travis. You were merely a parasite she outgrew. And as for making me leave..." He took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink, the ice clinking softly against the glass, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in the small apartment. "I've been sitting here for 40 minutes wondering if you were incompetent or just slow. I decided on both." The psychological battle had begun before Travis even realized he was outmatched. Junho began to speak in a low, conversational tone, detailing Travis's life with a terrifying, intimate accuracy. He mentioned the address of the gym where Travis worked, the amount of debt he owed to a local bookie, and the exact hospital wing where his mother was currently recovering from surgery. Every word was a needle, precisely placed to strip away Travis's illusion of anonymity and power. "I know the scent of men like you," Junho continued, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You aren't a lion. You are a stray dog that barks at the gate because it's the only way you feel big, but you've barked at the wrong gate tonight." Travis lunged forward, the flashlight raised like a club, his face contorting into a mask of frantic rage. He was used to people flinching, he was used to the world giving way when he became violent. But Junho didn't flinch. He didn't even stand. In a blur of motion that Travis's eyes couldn't fully track, Junho's hand shot out, catching Travis's wrist mid-swing. The grip was like a vise of heated iron. With a slow, agonizing pressure, Junho twisted. Travis let out a strangled cry as the flashlight tumbled to the floor, rolling away and illuminating the intricate black ink of the tiger on Junho's forearm, a predator finally unsheathed in the dark. "I want you to understand something very clearly," Junho whispered, leaning in until their faces were inches apart. "I don't need the police to stop you. I don't need a restraining order. If you so much as think her name in your sleep, I will know. And I will ensure that the rest of your life is lived in a silence so profound you will forget the sound of your own voice." He released Travis's wrist and stood up, his height suddenly dominating the room. The sheer, crushing weight of his presence forced Travis to stumble backward toward the window he had broken into. The monster had finally met the master, and the realization of his own insignificance was more devastating than any physical blow Travis had ever received. "Leave," Junho commanded. "Through the front door, my men are waiting to show you the way out. Do not look back." As Travis scrambled out, his pride shattered and his spirit broken by a man who hadn't even raised his voice, Junho turned toward the bedroom door. Amara was standing there, the emergency phone still clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with a mix of terror and an overwhelming, dangerous relief. The midnight visit had ended, but as Junho walked toward her, the tiger still visible on his skin, she realized that the war for her freedom had entered a much darker, much deeper territory. The transition from the claustrophobic shadows of Amara's apartment to the sprawling, silent grandeur of the Seo family estate felt like crossing an invisible border into another country. The black sedan moved through the iron gates of a hillside manor that overlooked the city, a fortress of glass and stone that felt completely disconnected from the world where men like Travis Cole existed. Amara sat in the backseat, her fingers tracing the smooth edges of the emergency phone, watching the way the moonlight hit the ancient trees lining the drive. Beside her, Seo Junho remained a statue of calm, though the air between them was charged with the weight of the confession he was about to make. He led her through a silent foyer of polished marble and into a private study that smelled of old paper, cedar, and expensive tobacco. The room was illuminated only by the dying embers of a fireplace and the soft glow of a desk lamp. Junho moved to a sideboard, pouring 2 glasses of water before turning to face her. He began to unbutton his shirt again, but this time he didn't stop at the cuffs. He shed the white fabric entirely, standing before her in the dim light, his torso and arms a living tapestry of black and gray ink. "In the world I was born into, skin is a ledger," Junho said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to pull at the very air in the room. He gestured to the tiger that Amara had seen so many times, the one that coiled from his neck down his shoulder. "The Siberian tiger is the mark of the Seo family. It represents a power that does not need to roar to be felt. It is the predator that waits, the one that governs the forest through silent presence." He turned slightly, showing her the intricate scales of a dragon that wound around his ribs, its claws clutching a traditional Korean sword. "The dragon is for wisdom and the burden of leadership. It is a reminder that every life I take or protect is a weight I must carry forever." Amara stepped closer, her breath hitching as she saw the sheer complexity of the work. It wasn't just art, it was a commitment, a physical manifestation of a life that operated outside the boundaries of normal society. She saw dates, names in Hanja, and symbols of scales and fire that spoke of a history written in blood. "Why are you showing me this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of awe and terror. "Because you need to understand that my protection is not a service I provide for a few weeks until your ex-boyfriend finds a new obsession," Junho replied, stepping into her space until the heat from his skin was palpable. "In my world, when we draw a circle around someone, that circle is absolute. It is a lifetime contract. You are no longer Amara Bennett, the woman who is running. You are Amara Bennett, the woman who belongs to the Seo family." He reached out, his hand hovering near her cheek, his eyes locking onto hers with a terrifying intensity. "This ink is my oath. To protect you means that your enemies become my enemies. Your safety becomes my honor. But it also means you can never go back to being ordinary." The gravity of his words settled over her like a heavy velvet shroud. She thought of the invisible leash Travis had used to haunt her, a tether made of fear and digital manipulation. Junho was offering her a different kind of bond, one made of iron, loyalty, and the promise of a lethal defense. It was a blood-bound contract that would shield her from the monsters of her past, but it would also bind her to the shadows of his future. She looked at the tiger on his skin, realizing that he was inviting her into the heart of the forest, offering her a throne in a kingdom she had only just discovered existed. "I spent 6 months being a victim," Amara said, her voice growing stronger as she looked at the symbols of his power. "I spent 6 months waiting for the floor to drop out from under me. I don't want to be ordinary anymore. I want to be safe." Junho's hand finally closed the distance, his thumb brushing against her jawline in a gesture that was both a caress and a claim. "Then the contract is signed," he whispered. "From this night on, the world will learn what happens when they try to touch what is mine." As they stood in the silent study of the Seo estate, surrounded by the history of a family that lived by the sword, Amara realized that she wasn't just accepting a protector. She was accepting a destiny that would transform her from a hunted survivor into a woman of the Seo family, a woman whose name would soon carry the same weight as the ink on Junho's skin. The transition from the sanctuary of the Seo estate back to the sterile reality of the city was jarring, a descent from a world of honor and ancient ink into a landscape of failing bureaucracy. Amara spent the following morning in a cramped, fluorescent-lit precinct, her hand instinctively hovering near the matte black emergency phone in her purse. Across the room, Travis Cole sat with a performance of aggrieved innocence that turned her stomach. He had called the police before dawn, not to report a crime against himself, but to file a desperate, calculated claim that Amara was being held against her will by a dangerous foreign operative. Travis had learned that the legal system was a weapon that could be fired from both ends. He sat before a tired detective, his eyes watery and his voice trembling with a rehearsed terror, claiming that a mob of Asians had abducted Amara from her apartment at midnight. He presented the broken window as evidence of a struggle, conveniently omitting the fact that he was the one who had shattered the glass to gain entry. To the police, it looked like a domestic dispute spiraling into a high-level kidnapping. To Amara, it was the ultimate betrayal of the very systems meant to protect her. "He's lying," Amara said, her voice echoing in the cold interrogation room. "I have a restraining order against him. He broke into my home. He assaulted me at a restaurant 2 nights ago." The detective sighed, tapping a pen against a folder of incomplete reports. "We have the report from the restaurant, Ms. Bennett, but the footage is missing. And as for the break-in, there are no prints other than yours and his, and he claims he was there to save you. Without a clear witness, it's his word against yours. And this Mr. CEO, his background is complicated. We can't just ignore a kidnapping allegation when it involves someone with his associations." The realization hit Amara like a physical blow. The law was a slow, clumsy giant, easily tripped by a man as manipulative as Travis. Because Junho existed in the shadows, his very presence made Amara's truth look like a fabrication in the eyes of the state. Travis wasn't trying to win a legal battle. He was trying to use the law to force Amara back into his reach, knowing that a police investigation would strip away the silent protection Junho had established. When she finally left the precinct, she found Junho waiting by the curb, the black sedan idling with a quiet, predatory hum. He didn't ask her what the police had said. He already knew. He watched her with a steady, unblinking intensity, his sleeves rolled down but the energy of the tiger still radiating from his posture. "The system is built for people who play by the rules, Amara," Junho said, his voice a low, soothing vibration as she slid into the seat beside him. "But Travis knows the rules are easy to bend. He is using your safety as a chess piece." Amara looked at the precinct building shrinking in the rearview mirror. She thought about the months of filing reports that went nowhere, the restraining orders that were treated like suggestions, and the way the detective had looked at her with suspicion because she had chosen a dangerous man over a familiar abuser. The legal system had failed her one last time. It was a broken leash, and she was tired of being tripped by it. "He thinks he's won," she whispered, her fingers tightening around the jade bracelet Junho had given her. "He thinks he can use the police to drag me back to him." "He can," Junho replied, his gaze hardening into something lethal and cold. "Unless you decide that the law is no longer enough. My world does not require a judge's signature to deliver justice. It does not require a jury to understand the truth of a bruise." He reached out, his hand covering hers, the heat of his skin a stark contrast to the sterile chill of the precinct. "If you want him stopped, truly stopped, you have to let go of the idea that the world is fair. You have to choose the method that works." Amara looked at the man beside her, the ink beneath his shirt, the men in suits who moved like shadows, and the absolute, terrifying certainty in his eyes. She had spent her life trying to be good, trying to follow the rules, only to be hunted by a man who thrived on their failure. The choice was no longer between safety and danger. It was between being a victim of the law or a partner in the shadows. "I'm done with the police," Amara said, her voice finally losing its tremor and replacing it with an icy resolve. "I don't want a report. I want him gone." Junho's lips quirked into a ghost of a smile, an expression of grim approval. "Then we stop playing their game and start playing mine," he said. "My world operates on extra-legal terms, Amara. From this moment, Travis Cole is no longer a citizen. He is a target. And I will show you exactly how we handle targets in the CO family." As the sedan sped away from the courthouse and toward the deeper parts of the city, Amara felt the final fraying of her old life. She was stepping off the map, leaving the broken world behind to embrace the brutal, effective justice of the man who had claimed her as his own. The decision to abandon the broken safety of the legal system felt like shedding a heavy, rain-soaked coat. Amara sat in the quiet luxury of the CO Estate's library, her fingers hovering over the matte black emergency phone, but she wasn't waiting for a call this time. She was the one issuing the invitation. Under the watchful, approving gaze of CO Junho, she had spent the afternoon coordinating with his security team to transform an upcoming high society art gallery opening into a kill zone, not for a life, but for the predatory delusion Travis Cole still clung to. Amara knew Travis better than he knew himself. She knew that his obsession was fueled by the sight of her thriving without him. If he saw her in public, seemingly vulnerable and basking in the attention of the elite, he wouldn't be able to resist the urge to reclaim her. She chose the venue with a cold, strategic eye, a minimalist gallery downtown with high ceilings, echoing floors, and a labyrinthine back-of-house area that Junho's men had already mapped and secured. He will see the vulnerability he wants to see, Amara said, her voice steady as she looked at the tactical display on the screen before her. He'll think I'm trying to go back to my old life, and he'll think the gallery is his best chance to corner me in front of witnesses. Junho stood behind her, his hand resting on the back of her chair, his thumb brushing the silk of her dress. The bait must be perfect, Amara. He must believe he has found a gap in my armor. He turned her chair to face him, his dark eyes searching hers for any sign of the victim she used to be. He found only the sharp, lethal resolve of a woman who had finally learned that power was the only language a beast understood. The night of the gallery opening, Amara wore a dress of shimmering, liquid silver, a target that caught every stray beam of light. She moved through the crowd with a rehearsed grace, a glass of champagne in one hand, while the other remained tucked in her clutch. Inches from the emergency phone, Junho was visible but distant, playing the role of the busy benefactor, purposely leaving a 10-foot radius of open space around her. It was a staged security gap, a deliberate invitation for a predator to strike. She felt the shift in the room's energy before she saw him. The air seemed to thicken, the light-hearted chatter of the patrons turning into a dull, meaningless hum in her ears. Then, she saw the reflection in a polished metal sculpture. Travis. He looked haggard, his denim jacket replaced by a poorly fitted blazer in a desperate attempt to blend in, his eyes wide and bloodshot with a frantic, religious fervor. He didn't see the silent Korean men positioned by every exit. He saw only the woman who had dared to think she was free. Amara took a slow sip of her drink and moved toward the back of the gallery, toward a dimly lit hallway that led to the private viewing rooms. She made her pace brisk, feigning a sudden desire for privacy, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete floor. She heard the heavy, uneven footfalls behind her, the sound of a man who thought he was winning. The moment she stepped into the secluded viewing room, the door was shoved open behind her. Travis lunged inside, slamming the door shut and locking it with a manic, triumphant grin. "Did you think you could hide in a crowd, Amara?" he wheezed, his face contorting with a mix of rage and a terrifying kind of relief. "I told you, there's nowhere you can go, not even with your little bodyguard." He reached for her, his fingers curling into the familiar, aggressive shape of a claw, but Amara didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply stood her ground, her silver dress reflecting the cold, clinical light of the room. "I wasn't hiding, Travis," she said, her voice dropping into a register of icy calm that stopped him mid-stride. "I was waiting." Travis froze, his hand inches from her shoulder, as the silence of the room was broken by a soft, mechanical click. From the shadows behind the oversized canvases, Junho stepped out, his sleeves already rolled up to reveal the tiger, his eyes fixed on Travis with the absolute certainty of a man who had already won. At the same time, the hidden cameras in the corners of the room began to glow with a steady, red light. "You wanted a witness, Travis," Junho said, his voice a low, terrifying vibration. "Now you have 50, and they are all recording the exact moment you violated the last of your chances." The realization hit Travis like a physical blow. The gallery wasn't a public outing. It was a theater. Every step he had taken, every word he had hissed into her ear, was being fed directly to the CO family's private servers and the emergency lines of the precinct. Amara had baited the beast into a cage made of its own obsession. As Junho's men entered the room to finalize the extra-legal transition, Amara looked at Travis one last time. He didn't look like a monster anymore. He looked like a small, broken thing that had finally run out of shadows to hide in. She turned her back on him, walking toward the man who had taught her that protection wasn't about hiding. It was about choosing the terms of the fight. The beast had been lured, trapped, and dismantled, and as the gallery doors closed behind her, Amara knew she was finally stepping into a future where she was no longer the prey. The capture of Travis Cole at the gallery had provided a fleeting sense of justice, but as the black sedan climbed the winding, mist-shrouded roads toward the highest peak of the CO estate, Amara realized the true trial was only beginning. The air here was thinner, colder, and smelled of ancient pine and damp stone. This was the inner sanctum of the CO family, a place where the extra-legal justice she had embraced was not just a tactic, but a way of life spanning generations. Beside her, Junho was silent, his profile sharp against the moonlight, his own tension manifesting as a rhythmic tapping of his fingers against the leather armrest. Tonight was not about her survival. It was about her worthiness to stand in the shadow of the tiger. They reached a traditional hanok structure nestled within the modern glass fortress, a wooden pavilion that felt like a pocket of time preserved in amber. Two guards bowed in unison as Junho led Amara inside, where the scent of bitter tea and incense hung heavy in the air. At the far end of the room, seated on a low silk cushion, was the chairman. Junho's father did not possess his son's athletic grace. He was a man carved from old oak, his face a map of scars and deep-set wisdom, his eyes two dark flint stones that seemed to look through Amara rather than at her. "You have brought a bird with broken wings into a house of predators, Junho," the chairman said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that commanded the silence of the room. He did not look at his son. His gaze remained fixed on Amara, weighing the silver of her dress against the iron he required in her soul. Junho bowed deeply. "She is not a bird, father. She is the one who baited the beast. She is the one who chose the ink over the law." The chairman stood slowly, his movements deliberate and pained, yet radiating a terrifying authority. He walked toward Amara, the silk of his traditional robes whispering against the floorboards. He stopped inches from her, so close she could see the faint tremor in his hands, a tremor that did nothing to diminish the threat he represented. "To be a victim is easy," the chairman whispered, his breath smelling of earth and tea. "The world is full of victims who cry for protection. But to lead beside a CEO, you must be capable of the very violence that once terrified you. You must have an iron soul that does not flinch when the blood is on your own hands." He gestured to a low table where a single, unsheathed dagger lay beside a series of printed photographs. Amara's heart lurched as she recognized the images. They were high-resolution stills of Travis Cole, bound and bloodied in a basement she didn't recognize, his face a mask of the same empty defeat she had once felt. "He is the ghost that haunts you," the chairman said, his voice devoid of empathy. "My son has neutralized him, but as long as he breathes, he is a tether to your weakness. If you wish to be part of this family, you must be the one to decide his final fate. You must show me that you can discard the good woman the world taught you to be." Amara looked at the dagger, the blade gleaming with a cold blue light, and then at the photos of the man who had spent 6 months systematically dismantling her life. She thought of the invisible leash, the hair pulling, and the way the legal system had looked at her with suspicion. The room felt like it was shrinking, the silence of the guards and the steady gaze of Junho pressing in on her. This was the CEO initiation, a demand for a transformation that could never be undone. She stepped toward the table, her hand trembling as she reached for the hilt of the blade. She looked at Junho, seeking a sign, but he remained a statue, his eyes reflecting only the flickers of the firelight. He had given her the shield, now his father was demanding she become the sword. Amara picked up the knife. The weight of it was surprising, balanced, cold, and absolute. She turned back to the chairman, her posture straightening, the silver of her dress shimmering like armor. "I spent 6 months waiting for someone else to end the nightmare," she said, her voice dropping into that new, icy register of command. "But I didn't come here to be a killer. I came here to be a CEO." She didn't look at the photos. She looked directly into the chairman's flint-like eyes. "If you want a common assassin, you have men for that. If you want a partner for your son, you need someone who knows that true power is the restraint to let a man live in a prison of his own fear, knowing that I am the one who holds the key." She slammed the dagger into the wooden table, the blade quivering inches from the chairman's hand. "I don't need to spill his blood to prove I am strong. I proved it when I walked into that gallery and looked him in the eye without flinching." The silence that followed was deafening. Junho took a sharp breath, his hand moving instinctively toward his cuff. The chairman stared at the vibrating blade, then back at Amara. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his scarred face, not a smile of warmth, but one of recognition. "You do not seek entry for security," the chairman concluded, his voice gaining a hint of respect. "You seek it for dominion. You have the iron soul, Amara Bennett. You do not flinch at the monster because you have realized you are the one who commands the cage." He turned to Junho and nodded once, a gesture of final approval. "Welcome to the family. May your enemies learn to fear your mercy as much as my son's blade." As they left the pavilion, Amara felt the final weight of her old identity fall away. She had passed the initiation not by becoming a murderer, but by proving she was an equal partner in the CO world of shadows. She was no longer the prey. She was the queen of the shadows, and as she walked beside Junho toward their shared future, she knew that Travis Cole was no longer even a memory. He was just a ghost she had finally chosen to stop seeing. The morning after the initiation, the world outside the CO estate seemed to have shifted its axis. The air was no longer thick with the static of anticipation. It was heavy with a profound, resonant peace. Travis Cole was gone, not just from the city, but from the very fabric of Amara's reality. He had been permanently removed from the picture, relocated to a facility far beyond the reach of his own delusions, where the silence of the CO family would be his only companion for the remainder of his days. The invisible leash had been severed with the same surgical finality that Junho applied to everything he touched. Amara stood on the balcony of the estate, dressed in a gown of deep emerald silk that mirrored the ancient pines surrounding the fortress. The silver dress from the gallery was gone, a relic of the woman who had used herself as bait. Today, she was the woman who had survived the trap and claimed the hunter's ground. Beside her, CO Junho stood in a tailored charcoal suit, his sleeves rolled down but the energy of the tiger resting beneath the fabric like a coiled spring. He didn't need to speak. The way he looked at her, not as a prize, but as a peer, was the only validation she required. "The transition is complete," Junho said, his voice a low, melodic vibration that blended with the wind. "Travis is no longer a name that carries weight. He is a ghost that has finally found its grave." Amara nodded, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like the final shedding of a heavy skin. She realized then that being claimed by the Mafia, a concept that had once terrified her, was not the cage she had feared. Instead, it had been her path to becoming her own master. The CO family had not taken her freedom. They had provided the iron and the ink required for her to build it on her own terms. She was no longer running from the shadows. She was the one who decided where they fell. That evening, the estate hosted a celebration that was less a party and more a coronation. The inner circle of the CO family gathered in the grand dining hall, men in sharp suits with ink peeking from their collars, and women who moved with the quiet, lethal elegance of high-ranking predators. Amara walked at Junho's side, her head held high, the jade bracelet on her wrist catching the light of the crystal chandeliers. When she met the chairman's gaze at the head of the table, he didn't look for weakness. He raised a glass of traditional rice wine in a silent toast of recognition. "To the woman who looked at the blade and did not blink," the chairman announced, his gravelly voice commanding the attention of every soul in the room. "To the newest daughter of the CO family, may her reign be as long as her soul is iron." The room erupted in a disciplined, rhythmic applause, a sound of respect that Amara had never expected to earn. As she sat at the table, surrounded by the power and the secrecy of the Mafia, she felt a profound sense of homecoming. She looked at Junho, whose hand covered hers with a warmth that was no longer just protective, but celebratory. They were partners in a world that didn't always play fair, but it was a world where loyalty was absolute and fear was a tool, not a master. Later, as the celebration wound down and the mist began to roll back over the hills, Amara and Junho walked through the estate's moonlit gardens. The silence was no longer a canvas for her anxiety. It was a sanctuary. She thought of the woman who had sat in that restaurant 9 months ago, fearful, trapped, and waiting for the next blow. That woman was dead, and in her place stood the queen of the shadows. "Any regrets, Amara?" Junho asked, stopping beneath a flowering cherry tree, his eyes locking onto hers with that familiar, intense focus. "None," she replied, her voice steady and clear. "I spent my life trying to find a world where I could be safe. I didn't realize I had to be the one to create it." Junho leaned in, his thumb brushing against her cheek, his touch a promise of the extraordinary life that lay ahead. "You didn't just create it, Amara. You conquered it." As they stood in the heart of the CO estate, under the watchful gaze of the tiger and the dragon, Amara finally understood the true meaning of the ink on Junho's skin. It was a map of survival, a testament to strength, and a vow of eternal devotion. She had chosen the shadows, and in doing so, she had found the only light that mattered. The story that began with a scream had ended in a whisper of absolute, unshakable power. Amara Bennett was finally home, and she was finally free.